Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending where you are. Welcome to the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons. How can TANF play a role in prevention session? First, let me introduce myself. My name is Lisette Hester. I'm a program specialist with the Self-Sufficiency TA Division of the Office of Family Assistance. I will be responsible for moderating this session today, and I'm glad to welcome you all. Before we begin, please note that we will have a Q&A after all the presentations are complete. Please post your questions in the chat box and raise your hand, and I will call on you when we open Q&A. In addition, there will also be an evaluation distributed at the end of the presentation. The context of this workshop will explore how TANF can play an active role in preventing occurrences of missing and murdered Indigenous persons known as MMIP through factors including providing trauma-informed case management, establishing strong community partnerships, and building up a person's support networks and environment. The diverse panel of speakers will introduce participants to the ACF Framework on missing and murdered Indigenous persons, provide a lived testimonial, and highlight how tribal TANF programs can partner with local justice and advocacy organizations to support survivors while shining a light on prevention efforts. So we have a poll that we are about to distribute, and we want to see who is joining us today. So thus far, we have federal government partners, welcome, at 41%, and we have tribal and TANF and new program directors, supervisors, welcome. In addition to, we have state TANF program members and other. Our speakers for today are Michelle Sovay, the Acting Commissioner for the Administration for Native Americans, Hope McDonald Lonetree, the Deputy Commissioner for the Administration for Native Americans, Carolyn DeFord, Trafficking Project Coordinator and MMIP Advocate, Puyallup Tribe of Indians. We have Marlene Mack, Senior Manager, and Amanda Cialofi, Advocacy Program Manager for Alaska Native Justice Center, and Deborah Northberg, Director and Child and Family Services, Cook Inlet Tribal Council. We will begin with Michelle Sovay.
Sego Sewagwego, Michelle Sovay Yanyats, Danunganya Gahaga, Niwago Wajodo. Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Sovay and I belong to the Mohawk Nation. I want to thank the organizers of this conference for prioritizing this issue of how the TANF program can address missing and murdered Indigenous people, or MMIP. I deeply regret that I cannot be there in person to join this session. The primary intent of today's workshop is to explore how TANF can play an active role in preventing MMIP. TANF programs can provide trauma-informed case management, establish strong community partnerships, and build up a support network that contribute to healthy environments for families in need. I want to share a short news story that I listened to last week. Last week, Congress heard from 4 U.S. gymnasts testify that the institutions that should have protected them from sexual abuse and violence failed. In their stories, we heard about systems and protocols that weren't equipped to protect them. Instead of being listened to, they were questioned. Instead of response, they were met with denials. Instead of being empowered to seek justice, they were silenced at every turn, but their relentless advocacy resulted in a national spotlight and their abuser being imprisoned for life without parole. This story of a system that questions, denies, and silences victims instead of robustly and equitably responding to and preventing violence is familiar to many of us from Indigenous communities. So is the story of strong voices making serious change. It's those voices that have led the movement to address missing and murdered Indigenous persons, and why we're here today. For too long, families and communities have sought a response equal to their suffering when someone from their community has gone missing or is murdered. For too long, many have been denied justice. The bottom line is that everyone deserves to be safe and valued, and for victims of violence and their families to know that their lives and well-being matter. TANF programs have the potential, the opportunity, and even the duty to help shift this narrative, to let their clients, these men, women, and children, know that they do indeed matter. Your support and connections to complementary services show them they are important to their families, to their communities, and to their nations. In order to help achieve this vision and respond to the calls of MMIP activists, ACF created a framework for MMIP prevention. This framework outlines a proactive, preventative, collaborative approach to MMIP. We know that risk and protective factors have a powerful impact on someone's likelihood to experience violence, and we know these factors are cumulative. Many of the families who seek services, like TANF from ACF, already feel isolated. They may have been made to feel powerless or unworthy of support. These failings and circumstances can also accumulate, and they make people vulnerable to violent victimization. Other risk factors include economic insecurity, being unhoused, being caught up in substance misuse. Protective factors include knowing that you are loved, having support structures, and being connected to a culture, community, and resources. By improving the social determinants of health early on, by minimizing these risk factors and bolstering the protective ones, we can provide protection that accumulates throughout the course of someone's life. In other words, programs like TANF that help provide stability and resources for families with children may be some of our best tools to prevent MMIP in the long term. If you, as a TANF program, are there to offer non-judgmental and trauma-informed care, those seeking services and support from you might not be the next statistic. I have heard from several tribal leaders over the years about why they have chosen to provide TANF services and how they seek to uplift, support, and value those clients. Each and every tribal member who succeeds is a success that builds up the future of their tribal nation. Because they see and treat each other as beloved relatives, they have a bedrock to build up trust, meaningful relationships, and healing. Our native wisdom and teachings instruct us to take care of each other, to ensure that elders and those less able are cared for, that we are all related and interconnected. Our future success, our safety and wellness cannot be unlinked from our fellow tribal citizens. I know that this is why our missing and murdered are so important to each and every one of us. I thank in advance the other presenters you will hear from today, who will share their own insights, perspectives, and examples of how they are changing the narrative in their own communities. And again, I thank you for your partnership, passion, and persistence to change the narrative and to change the systems so that we are all safe and well cared for. Nyawangoa, thank you.
We thank Michelle Sovay, the acting commissioner, for her opening words. And now we will move into Hope McDonald Lonetree as she gives us her presentation.
Thank you. Yat Shea Hope McDonald Lonetree and Shea Totachini Nishle Hashkahat Soho Bashishtin Natlane Edishache Ado Batani Edishanelan. Good afternoon. My name is Hope McDonald Lonetree, and I am an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. I am also a former elected tribal legislator, a consultant at the U.S. Department of Justice, and I am currently the Deputy Commissioner at the Administration for Native Americans. I am very happy to be with you today, and I am thankful to the wonderful people at TANF for inviting me to join you this afternoon. The past 2 years have been surreal in our tribal communities due to COVID. We have lost friends and family. We have also prayed for them as they have endured a horrific sickness. My thoughts and prayers go out to each of you and your family and your communities as we remember those who have journeyed on. Although we were not able to conduct our healing ceremonies, our cultural teachings kept us strong and hopeful. The numerous challenges that existed in our tribal communities were exacerbated by the pandemic. For example, the struggle to find a safe home environment was real. Accessing education via the internet was difficult without broadband. Resources were overwhelmed. Mandatory reporting was limited. Many of our children were isolated with their abusers, likewise families. Though it was tough, I appreciate all that you were able to do in your TANF programs during these unprecedented times. Often your services were the only hope for our families who needed support and to make it through another day. I thank you for providing coordinated care, trauma-informed care, as Michelle mentioned, financial literacy training, online safety awareness for our children and students who are learning from home, culturally sensitive services, parenting classes that have helped many young people, and career development. All of these and many more are powerful mechanisms to keep families safe and provide them with tools for growth and healing. At ANA, we partner with other agencies, other federal agencies and states to help strengthen your local efforts. Please check out our webpage, the Administration for Native Americans, for resources, including, as Michelle mentioned, an MMIP framework that we have been working with. And also to contact us for additional resources. We are happy to do that. We continue to participate in all of the agencies' MMIP initiatives, including USDOJ and Department of Interior. And our combined efforts, both yours, the feds, and the state agencies, help families in distress and will help them and help prevent circumstances that put our loved ones at risk. Our power in tribal communities is in our family ties, our prayers, and our cultural teachings. We have been resilient, but we continue to need partnerships to make it through these unprecedented times. So I want to thank you for being here today, for sharing some of the best practices, sharing your experiences, and letting us know what other ways that we can help build partnerships, provide additional resources. The Administration for Native Americans provides many grants that we would also be happy to share with you. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, and please reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your opening words, Ms. McDonald Lonetree. For the other speakers, I'm sorry, I see that in the chat there is the sound is a little low for some individuals. So just be mindful of that when speaking, because individuals may not be able to hear. As we move forward, we have Carolyn DeFord next.
Good morning, everybody. Bear with me a second. I'm still learning how to Zoom. Okay, can you see my screens? Slahil, Carolyn DeFord Seed Stas Balap Chad Squaliap Chad Tu Alt Chad Taquoma Estro Ilchad. What I said is good day. My name is Carolyn DeFord. I'm Puyallup, Nisqually, and Cowlitz, and I'm joyful to be here today. I introduced myself in my language because my mother didn't get a chance to, and my grandfather, he could have been jailed for speaking in his language or killed. I'm the first generation in my family that has had the opportunity to learn that. And when I introduce myself, I'm calling on my ancestors to walk with me, and I'm acknowledging and pronouncing to the world that I know who I am and where I come from. This is a cultural teaching that is passed down from generation to generation that ties us to each other and our community. It tethers us to our land. When I say that I am Nisqually and Puyallup, I come from this land. It also obligates me to walk in a good way, to be truthful, and to do everything that I do with the best of intentions because I'm representing my ancestors and my family. So today we're just going to talk about the objectives, impact on families. As a family member, this has been something that has affected me personally and very deeply, and I'm just one family member out of over 10,000 in our country. We're going to look a little bit at the policy and historical trauma and how they're the root of MMIWP and the link between domestic violence and human trafficking. I always refer to it as MMIWP because I want to honor the women of our First Nations who started this movement, who originated it in their powerful voices, who started the MMIW movement. So I keep the W there and I bring in the P to acknowledge all of our people, our men, our children, our Two-Spirit. If we're going to solve the problem, we have to address the whole problem, not just women or children, but the men too, the whole family and everybody that they've left behind. And we'll also look at the link between domestic violence and human trafficking.
Carolyn, we cannot see your screen.
Oh no. Let me see if I can get out of here. Did I not share? See, I told you I was Zoom challenged. Let me go back. Sorry, you guys. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. There you go. All right. So there's my introduction. We're going to talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and people and how did we get here and our objectives. And then this is a little bit about my story and where I'm coming from and why this is so important to me. This is my mom. Her name is Leona Lee Claire Kinsey. She went to the grocery store in October 1999 and she was never seen again. Her investigation didn't kick off for about a month and a half after she disappeared because she's over 18 and she had the right to go missing. There weren't any immediate signs of foul play for the investigation to have a direction to go other than it appeared to outsiders that she had just walked away. My mom was a mother, a sister, a daughter. She was a new grandma and now she's a great grandma. And that has had ripple effects through my whole family and the way that I grieve for her for the last 22 years, how that has affected my children and that they didn't get their grandmother's stories and how that's affected their ability to parent and bond and see a grandparent role when we didn't have one as an example. And now I'm in that spot and not having had those teachings from my mom. These are, before they're a missing person, they are our family members. When I first reported my mom missing, the hardest part of that really knocked the wind out of me was picking up the phone and saying, my mom's a missing person. And that was the first time that I had labeled her. And from that moment on, things were never the same. It kind of left me blowing in the wind without my mom there. So to understand the issue, we have to understand a little bit of the facts. These are just a little bit. There's tons of data out there and we're always getting new data and it's all different because it comes from different sources and measures different aspects of criminal offenses versus victimization. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reports that there's only 46 Native children reported into that database. It's a federal law that children missing from care are required to be entered into NCMEC. However, with only 46 Native children in there, we can see that that's not happening. And in local investigations, we see that as well, where we have a child who's missing from care and all of the tools that are being used or that are available to find them are not being accessed. The National Missing and Unidentified Person System only reflects 118 missing Native youth and 744 total missing Native adults, while the National Crime Information Center reported that there were over 7,000 missing Native youth last year. The NCIC report does include duplicates for repeat runaways, but there's so many discrepancies in the data that we really have to focus on accurately collecting data and being diligent in the reporting of race and victimization. Recognizing the signs of individuals who may be victims of domestic violence and human trafficking, it allows us to provide adequate services. Sometimes it's difficult to recognize DV and human trafficking, or even to tell the difference and know what you're looking at. It might be impossible to separate the two because sometimes they're very intrinsically linked. We have to look at the whole picture, what the individual is experiencing, how they got there, the polyvictimization, and legal solutions and services to help bring them out of those situations. The link between MMIW and domestic violence has been something that our families have faced on a normal basis, on a daily basis. We maybe grow up experiencing and witnessing domestic violence through our mothers and our aunties and our grandmothers and our friends and our circles, and it becomes so normalized that we don't identify that it's domestic violence or even when it's happening to us. The CDC reported that homicide was the third leading cause of death for Native American men ages 1 through 44, and the sixth leading cause of death for Native American women ages 1 through 44. Of those homicides, it reported that 75% of Native women homicides were linked to domestic violence and intimate partner violence. These are people we love, that we live with, that are family, spouses, and that is where we're receiving or at the end of the most victimization. Normalized in pop culture. We see it in television, we see it in the news, we see it in our daily lives. Often it's not defined. Domestic violence isn't defined by our communities because it's so normal that it's just a fight. It was just an argument. He didn't hit me. And so the ability for us to kind of look at ourselves and define domestic violence and how we experience it is whitewashed so much that we don't recognize the abuse that we experience or witness within our communities. This is an important aspect for the education, where we learn and can identify domestic violence and how we bring that awareness into our communities, into the services we provide. And then the link between domestic violence, like I said previously, they're intrinsically linked, possibly because of the risk factors that bring them there, the high rates of domestic violence and sexual assault, the access to services, and trafficking victims not identifying as trafficking, but identifying as intimate partner because this was my boyfriend, a Romeo pimp, you might say, or that it's familial trafficking, and this was my grandfather or my uncle who is having me do these things, and we just know that we don't like the situation, but it's just the way it is. Historical trauma compounds that trauma, and it's fueled by lack of opportunity, poverty, homelessness, and the high rates of mental illness and substance use. And a lot of this comes directly from Indian policy and the boarding school era. who are the traffickers? There's a relationship of some sort, right? They're either married, their spouse, there's a romantic relationship, maybe it's the Romeo pimp type of relationship that I talked about earlier, and they're groomed and lured into this life. Could be family, intergenerational. 35% of Native trafficking survivors indicated that they were first lured into trafficking or put out by a family member. 35%. That just shocks me. You know, these are people that we should be able to trust, but it's held so quiet. I'm trying to think of the right words, but it's one of these things that we don't talk about. We don't look at it. We don't talk about it. We turn the other way and pretend that it's not happening. And then survival sex, trading sex to meet basic survival needs, shelter, and protection. And I think within our work, we see a lot of this. Survival sex being the definition of trafficking, the exchange of sexual acts for anything of value, anything, shelter, clothes, food, childcare, protection, anything of value. A couch to sleep on. You know, survival sex is a form of trafficking that we don't really identify enough, but I think we see it on a pretty regular basis. And then this is just one of the indicators. I highlighted some of them that are very similar between domestic violence and human trafficking. And the love bombing, constant communication and control, the effect that has on us when we're under somebody's thumb so much, anxiety and the mental health consequences of it, verbal abuse, physical abuse, those kind of things. Domestic violence and human trafficking, being that they resemble each other so much, we really don't know the data around that. There's not a lot of studies on human trafficking that show the rates of homicide or the rates of victimization in that, because we don't look at it enough. There's so much stigma around reporting it and sharing your story that victims aren't really coming forward to talk about their experiences. There's not safe places to come forward with that. Our community labels them rather than calling them or looking at them as victims and prostituted people. We see them referred to as prostitutes or hookers, and that's not always the case. If there's willing sex workers out there, but they're not all willfully engaging in sex work. The average age that a child is lured into trafficking is between 12 and 15 years old. This is a supply and demand issue. They're luring 12 to 15-year-olds into that life because people want to purchase sex with 12 and 15-year-old people. These are some things that we can look at with that and indicators to show human trafficking. And I really encourage you to take some more in-depth red flags and response training on how to recognize human trafficking. We have a lot of at-risk and vulnerable youth. 5,000 unaccompanied youth die each year as a result of assault, illness, and suicide. 1 in 6 were likely victims of sex trafficking. When we talk about runaway youth, we often hear that they're running from something or to something. I think with that, we have to look at the language we use, just like referring to trafficking survivors as prostituted versus prostitutes, looking at them as victims rather than willful participants all the time. When we say runaway, it's the same thing. We think that they are willingly running from something or to something. We're putting stigma on that child in the perception that they can't follow the rules, they don't obey, they're delinquent, whatever the image that you see when you hear runaway, we put that on the child. But if they're running from something, we put that on the family, the parent, and the home life, that things must be really bad at home. They're being abused at home. And sometimes that neither one of those is the case, that they have been lured away. And by putting those labels on, we're ostracizing that family and breaking them down from the support systems, putting barriers between them and the support systems that they need. So how did we get here? There's a lot of Indian policies that brought us down here that all fuel into this. It's all so connected that we could easily spend 3 days talking about this, but these are just a couple. Indian policy in the boarding schools, and we'll touch on that. The Relocation Act, where our families, our ancestors were moved from their reservations and giving stipends to move to cities. In the next, one of the next maps that we'll look at, it will show some of those relocation cities and the high rates of MMIW and human trafficking within them. And then law. Major Crimes Act and the Oliphant decision, Oliphant versus Suquamish, took away the tribe's rights to prosecute Indians and non-native, or natives and non-natives on the reservation. It was systematic. It wasn't all at once. It happened a little bit here and a little bit here, and now we can only prosecute natives who don't commit major crimes on the reservation, and the grasp of our prosecution is really minimal. We can only do, I believe it's 3 years of a 3-year sentence and up to a $5,000 fine. That's the highest sentence that we can put on a criminal in our communities. We have VAWA and the Special Domestic Violence Criminal Jurisdiction Act, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to do that. You have to have the infrastructure and the logistics to be able to provide the same services on the reservation to prosecute non-natives as you would to prosecute natives. And what this has done, the Oliphant and the Major Crimes Act, those have created this maze, like a crazy, I call it a game of who's on first, but where else in the country do you have to ask, where did the crime occur? Because if it occurred on the road, it's going to fall under different jurisdiction. If it occurred on trust land, it's another jurisdiction. If it was a native versus a non-native on reservation, that's different jurisdiction. So who committed the crime? Who was the victim? Where did it happen? Exactly where did it happen? Because sometimes that can come down to a matter of inches on who has jurisdiction over that. And a lot of times, even our law enforcement is kind of confused and don't want to step on each other's toes and don't really know what direction to take first. So I just kind of look at it as this big game of who's on first, where the families and the victims of crime are the ones that are paying the price of that. The historical trauma of Indigenous people and how that plays out through some of this legislation was the Boarding School Act. It was the forced removal from our homelands, or the forced removal from our homelands to reservations, the forced adoption of our children, forced removal from our culture. This directly impacted our children and our families for generation after generation. All the things that so an elder told me a couple months ago that of all the things that they took from us, our ability to parent our children has been the most devastating because it's affected generation after generation. We see the high rates of children in foster care and the high rates of runaway youth that are happening within our communities. These are all tied to that boarding school era. So human trafficking, boarding schools, and foster care. This is kind of a touchy subject, but the churches directly profited off of forced assimilation. The churches were given the power by the president to decide on their own whether a native family was properly caring for their children. The churches were given large amounts of money for back in the day to remove those children from the home and civilize them. So forced assimilation. It was for profit. The more children they had in the boarding school, the more money they made and the more children they could get and the more money they kept bringing in. There was a lot of incentive to take our children. The lawyers, welfare agencies, and states are still profiting off of Native children. In some states, the rate of children that are taken into foster care is gosh, I can't remember the data. I don't want to go deep into that. I'll lose my mind. But in North Dakota, they received $70,000, I heard, in a recent report for each child that was taken from their home into foster care. $70,000 that went back into the state from the federal government to take care of these children. And we could be investing that into the long-term well-being of supporting these children and the families and providing these parenting classes and mentorships and opportunities. This is so important. Our children who are taken grow up and they don't know exactly how to nurture or show love. It affects the children's children and the children's children in a continuous cycle of intergenerational trauma. A lot of the the vulnerability factors that we face, or the things that are prevalent in our communities, you know, the lack of employment opportunity, the lack of support networks, the lack of having our basic needs met, these fueling into that survival sex as well. One of the biggest reasons DV survivors will stay with their perpetrator is the lack of somewhere safe to go. And then one of the largest reasons that women are on the streets and homeless is because they have fled domestic violence. If you think about that, again, go back to that 75% of Native women homicides were due to domestic violence. I removed my slide that had the map, but if you look at the data from the Polaris Project, they have a hotline map that shows where all of their hotline calls have come in, and they're lit up on a map. And you can look at that and kind of see your area. But there's also a report from the Urban Indian Health Institute that says the top 10 cities and states where Native women have gone missing or murdered. And every one of those spots on the top 10 cities and states is a spot on that map. There's that direct correlation between missing and murdered, human trafficking, and domestic violence and human trafficking being interrelated. When one of our families loses somebody, I just want to go back to my mom's story just a little bit. When I lost my mom, everything that connected me to who I was and who I thought I was gone. And I had to take time off of work to look for her, right? Because that's my mom. But I worked minimum wage. I couldn't afford to take time off work. I didn't have vacation or sick time back then. It was 20 years ago. And I barely had enough money to continue to pay my rent, let alone to search for her. There was no assistance in that. There was no backup plan to cover my rent while I tried to pick up the pieces, to take care of myself and my kids, and to grieve. I didn't get a chance. I got 9 days off, and I had to go directly back to work. My lights got shut off. I was 2 months behind in my rent because I had to prioritize my mom and my children and try to get a grip on my mental health. 9 days, that's not nearly enough. When our loved ones are taken, the family that's left behind is the one that steps in to pick up the pieces, where they're trying to take on new familial roles. If my sister went missing, I would still be auntie, but I would be playing a motherly role to her children now. If my son or daughter were to go missing, I would be taking in my children. So how do I afford to feed those extra mouths and to keep them in my home and with their family, to get them the medical care that they need when I don't have legal guardianship of them yet, to enroll them in school, to get them into counseling? What if I just have a little bitty car and now I need a minivan? Where is that going to come from? There's a lot of factors that we have to look at in how we're supporting families who have and are picking up the pieces from missing and murdered. Mental health, just the financial aspect of supporting and moving on with your lives. The rest of the world goes on business as usual, and we are stuck in day one of when we heard that they weren't coming home, stuck in day one of the first time I said, my mom's a missing person. The mental impact of that, and then the compounded stress of not knowing how I'm going to move forward with bills. How am I going to feed my children? What if I lose my job because I've taken so much time off? How am I going to pay all my back rent now? So there's a lot of things that our families go through, not just in that their person is missing, but moving forward for years. That the grieving process doesn't end. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and people, there's a sense of grief called ambiguous loss. That's when somebody you love is either physically missing but psychologically present, so that's missing people, or they're psychologically absent but physically present. So that might be seen in mental health, substance use disorder, dementia, those kind of things where we see the person, but they're just not there. And Dr. Pauline Voss says that ambiguous loss, that is one of the most devastating forms of loss for families to experience because you can't just get over it. It's unresolved. You're always at day one. You're always on that roller coaster of hope and not having hope and feeling guilty because you don't have hope. And looking back at the day that they were gone, that what could I have done differently if I had just called, if I'd have just gone, if I'd have just said no. Just constantly that self-analyzing of what you could have done to change it and blaming yourself for not having done it. What if I didn't search enough? I only took 9 days off. What if I could have found her if I had been able to take more time off? What if I had called her that day? You know, there's a lot of things that we put on ourselves for that. These vulnerabilities, I don't want to go too much into them because I know you've had a chance to read them, but I think that loss of cultural identity is a huge one, and it's been one of the most healing factors in my journey. Learning how to speak my language because my mom didn't, and learning the power of calling my ancestors to me and declaring that I know who I am and where I come from. I just hope today that something that I've shared, I know I went around and I took up a little bit more time than I should have because I lost myself in those slides, but I just hope that something that I shared today has moved your spirit to action. Our families and our future generations are dependent on a lot of the services that you're providing and counting on those services to fill the gaps and keep us moving. And it's been a long time since we've been able to lean on a program or another agency and be able to trust that they will do what they say and say what they mean. And you guys have a lot of opportunity to change lives, support families and children, and I thank you for the work that you do and your time listening to me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. We appreciate you giving us your insight and sharing your own personal story. Next up, we have a poll to see who are in the audience in terms of service providers. So Gina? How would you describe your role in relation to this issue? Okay, and in the lead is I want to better understand the issues of MMIP generally. Second, in the role, I have an ability to support others and individuals. And then in my role, I have the ability to prevent hurt and harm. Next up, we have Marlene Mack and Amanda Seliofi. I hope I said that correctly. I might have butchered it. I apologize if I did. They will be speaking from the advocacy. Marlene is the advocacy program manager, and they will be speaking from Alaska Native Justice Center.
Actually, it's Miss Deb's turn first. Sorry.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Deborah Northberg, Director of Child and Family Services, Cook Inlet, Tribal Council. Take it away.
Thank you. And I'll just pause a bit while the slides come up. And I want to thank you, Carolyn, for your powerful story today. It was very impactful to me. So I'd like to share with you today some efforts that we have made to develop both internal and external partnerships that support parents and children in our Tribal TANF program. So I'll start with a bit of context. Cook Inlet region is one of 13 corporations that were established in the Alaska Land Claims Settlement Act. And Cook Inlet Tribal Council is a nonprofit arm of Cook Inlet Region Incorporated, and we provide a myriad of services in the community. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Next slide. This is a snapshot of our service area. There are 8 tribes within Cook Inlet Region's service area. You'll see the arrow pointing to Anchorage. Anchorage is the largest hub city in Alaska. And so the region itself is multi-tribal, and Anchorage most certainly is multi-tribal. So we serve any Alaska Native American Indian person living in Anchorage here at CITC. Next slide. Here's a snapshot of the services that we provide. Our Employment and Training Department, it houses our Tribal TANF program. As mentioned, I serve as a Senior Director of Child and Family Services here at CITC, and we provide a continuum of family support, family preservation, family reunification, and early childhood development. We have recovery and reentry services and education and innovation services that are in both in-school services and enrichment services. And I'm in an energy efficient office. I'm sorry my light goes out regularly. And then, of course, our partners who are the Alaska Native Justice Center, whom you'll hear from next, and our Early Head Start Center, and our for-profit E-Line Media and CEI. So we have a broad array of services. Next slide, please. We began efforts many years ago recognizing that we have great opportunities given the multiple services and departments that we have under CITC's umbrella to really provide services that are whole person, whole family. So we started small back in 2006 in a Tribal TANF child welfare collaboration project. And what we realized in that project is that we really didn't understand who was receiving services in which department and when, but we did an evaluation that helped us understand that participants who were involved in more than one program fared better on our family assessment scale. So our big lift during that project was to create a common intake to all programs in order to develop a no wrong door to services. So beginning the conversation and connection among all our programs. We continued this effort in 2011 by adopting screening for all of our Tribal TANF participants that served to both increase internal referrals amongst our programs and external referrals for services toward the goal of supporting child safety and family stability. We adapted the protective factors survey for use in our Tribal TANF program, and we implemented it with the case manager and a parent at their first family self-sufficiency planning meeting. And the goal of that really was for the case manager to have meaningful conversations with a parent, not just about their work readiness and barriers that they were experiencing, but thinking about the whole family and how that related to moving towards self-sufficiency. During that time, we also dedicated a liaison between our Tribal TANF program and our Child and Family Services Department. That allowed us to easily refer families that were identified at risk through our screening in the Tribal TANF program to a Child and Family Services staff who would work more intensively with the family, most often in the home, to ensure that the family got the right supports at the right time. And most importantly, during that time, we recognized it was important to have a shared and common language across our programs. And so we implemented a shared training in the state child protection model for the Tribal TANF staff. That really resulted in improved communication between our two departments around issues that directly impacted child safety, and helped the Tribal TANF case managers to support families where a protective placement might have happened. We had made a change in our Tribal TANF plan to allow for short-term cash assistance up to 6 months for families that had a protective placement in order to prevent some of those cascading consequences that happen when a child goes into foster care, potential loss of housing, those types of issues. Next slide, please. We continued thinking about how we leverage partnerships, not just within CITC and across our services and departments, but then thought about who are our partners outside of CITC. And so we began developing partnerships to better serve children exposed to violence. And in 2012, we established a partnership with our local community mental health center, who houses our trauma center here in Anchorage, and our local tribal Head Start program. And our goal was to provide direct trauma treatment for children in the Head Start program, and we wrapped support around the parent in order to ensure that children could meaningfully engage in Head Start and to reduce the expulsions from Head Start that were a result of child behavior, which we were able to demonstrate in that project. We paired that with the clinician who provided the trauma treatment to kids on site, also provided staff consultation to give teachers at Head Start more tools and a better understanding of children's behavior when they began acting out. We expanded this effort in 2015 to our local DV shelter and attempted to provide mental health support for adults and children at shelter, and then again paired with staff training of the shelter staff by our trauma center staff. And then in 2017, we determined that what was lacking in our Tribal TANF program is opportunities to easily access services for families who were experiencing acute or chronic domestic violence. And so we co-located a domestic violence advocate of the local DV shelter within our Tribal TANF program, and then wrapped around support. So again, as we had before in our other projects, we paired that with staff training and consultation. Next slide, please. So the question we were trying to answer was, how do we reduce barriers and increase accessible support for people? So we began together as partners in our Tribal TANF, child and family, and domestic violence shelter services to identify points of participant entry to service. We needed to understand where the best place to screen for domestic violence might be that could trigger a referral. We hadn't screened before in our Tribal TANF program for domestic violence. We didn't have a great sense of how many families were impacted and how we could develop ways in which they could safely access services. We sought to understand together the federal and state laws and regulations that drive services in our respective systems. And we implemented cross-system training in order to build relationships within and among staff in the two departments in our community partner, and improve our staff's ability and confidence in talking with victims of violence so that we can better link them to supports. Next slide, please. So what have we learned in that process? We implemented our Flourishing Child program that specifically co-located a DV advocate in our Tribal TANF program over the course of 4 years. And as I mentioned, we had already implemented a protective factor survey in our Tribal TANF program in order to identify referrals and resources for families at risk of OCS involvement. So we attempted in that project to integrate a DV screener into this existing process so that we could provide immediate access to advocacy services on site at CITC. We trained case managers, and in that process, we began to understand that the existing protective factor screening was implemented in various ways and not very consistent. And so we planned together around improving that process so that we could increase the consistent use of the screening. And we had a couple different iterations of this. We tried and failed a couple times. We, instead of screening with the Tribal TANF case manager, we had our domestic violence advocate introduce a screening at an orientation to employment and training services, and realized that didn't result in any positive screens that helped us to link people. We understood that the point of our screening was not to understand how many people were impacted. Really, the point of our screening was access to the services we had on site, and the importance of services on site in our Tribal TANF program was that it's a non-traditional location to access that immediate support. People come here because we have many, many services and can confidentially access those services. So we have ultimately abandoned the screening in favor of providing information to our participants about the availability of those services. We created a confidential referral screening, and from years 3 to 4, we increased the referrals to our on-site DV advocate by about 59%. Things that we learned in that process that were important in informing how we move forward were really some anecdotal information from participants about being afraid to disclose that information to their Tribal TANF case manager for fear of maybe some required services that they weren't ready to engage in, or potentially some sanctions if they were in a relationship where they were moving in and out of relationship and were afraid to report another adult in their home. And so we had removed our TANF case manager from that referral process completely in order to allow people the freedom to access the services in a safe way. We discovered that a shared understanding of issues impacting participants experiencing IPV and domestic violence did result in some actual changes to our program processes. One great example for us was in our Tribal TANF program. A victim of violence was required to present a temporary restraining order in order to qualify for an extension of TANF benefits. And through that consultation process with our on-site DV advocate, it became clear that that was an unnecessary barrier for a victim, and that endorsing that a parent was experiencing domestic violence really was sufficient to justify that continued support. And finally, we discovered that cross-training in the Tribal TANF program really can impact the prevalent and adaptive culture of silence. And certainly this is true for many reasons. Protective of self, protective of family, protective of community. We learned that staff can become more comfortable talking with and responding to disclosures of violence, and that we needed to nurture and support all levels of the relationship, staff to participant, staff to referring partner, and ultimately participant to family members. And so what we were successfully able to implement some training. During that period, 61 CITC staff attended at least one training with our advocate, and 30% attended 2 or more. We did a survey after and learned that 70% of staff said they felt more comfortable talking to survivors and children about ways that they can stay safe. And 86% of agreed or strongly agreed that the trainings were better, that they were better able to effectively coordinate services for participants and families as a result of that training by our DV advocate. So we continue on this road and recognize that there often is a parallel process across systems of staff with one another and staff and participants. And so I think that's the greatest lesson we have learned, is to pay attention to relationships in order to provide a safe space for parents and children experiencing violence to access help. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I offer this disclaimer.
Thank you, Ms. Northberg. We appreciate your presentation. The next presentation that we have is from the Alaska Native Justice Center. We have Marlene Mack, who is the senior manager, and we have Amanda C. Alofi.
Close enough. Cialofi.
I'm trying. Thank you.
Well, greetings, everyone. Talofa, lo Amanda Matsukumano Cialofi. My America Samoa. My name is Amanda Cialofi, so I just greeted you in my native language. I am from the Pacific Islands, more specifically American Samoa, but I grew up in Alaska, and in the last 10 years prior to moving back to the hub community of Anchorage, I spent 10 years living and working in Utqiagvik among the Inuit people there. And I also want to recognize that I currently live and work in the homelands of the Dena'ina people as well.
And thank you, Deb. First, I wanted to thank Carolyn for sharing her story with us. That is very brave, and it's very impactful for me, so I will take a lot home with me on that. And to introduce myself, my name is Marlene Mack. I'm the senior manager at the Alaska Native Justice Center. I am a Nubiak and Swedish descent, born in Barrow, Alaska. However, I was raised in Nome. I am the daughter of Jack and Tiny Carpenter of Nome. Today, I'd like to share some of our experience in partnering with such agencies like CITC that provide TANF opportunities, and how TANF plays an important role in our agency approach to assist participants in their journey of breaking the cycle of abuse. One of those ways is empowerment and the path to financial freedom from their abuser. The Alaska Native Justice Center is located here in Anchorage, as Ms. Amanda shared. We are a subsidiary of CITC. Deb shared her department's role in one of the many important social, educational, and employment services to Alaska Natives and Native Americans living in the Cook Inlet region, offered by CITC. However, our organization provides advocacy services for victims and survivors of violent crime, human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. We also have programs for adult and youth reentry services. We also have a great family law team here, which we are super excited to have. And we have a legal team here that also works directly with tribes through the ICWA processes and addresses tribal code issues. Recently, we hired a tribal healer to bring back the cultural aspect to receiving healthy services for our victims and survivors. We offer these services to individuals statewide for both Native and non-Native individuals who are seeking services in our region, which Ms. Deb announced earlier. Because of the many unique challenges and barriers in Alaska, we quickly realized that partnerships are key to victim services work in Alaska. We have a collaborative approach with the idea that ANJC is not going to cure all of the problems that come before it by itself. And we believe in the power of partnership with our relatives. By using the power of community partnership, we can bring to bear not just the strength of ANJC, but all the other vital organizations that are involved in addressing the social problems that affect Alaska's people. Because of our unique position within the Alaska Native community, ANJC is able to bring important folks to the table to see what our gaps in services are and how do we move forward with those gaps. Who does what well and who can do it better in their areas. One of our goals in advocacy is to provide our participants with the necessary tools of empowerment. One of those tools includes financial independence from their abuser. Our advocates will evaluate the immediate need of the participant, and along with the survival, they'll create a success plan. TANF plays a huge role in that plan in order to start financial freedom journey so that our participant needs to break free from their abuse. Programs like TANF and SNAP give victims and survivors a beginning foundation to take care of themselves while they're rebuilding their lives, while trying to take care of their basic needs for themselves and their families to find safe housing and employment. As many of you know, TANF provides direct financial assistance to families. SNAP and unemployment and other programs are crucial and critical in providing increased financial freedoms for our survivors. ANJC is also very progressive in our prevention of abuse, and we do understand how the importance of addressing those issues because of issues like historical trauma, as Carolyn mentioned earlier, plays a huge role in our response to the needs of the community that we serve. This is a great segue into another important focus, which is prevention. For that, I'd like to introduce you to one of our advocacy program managers, Amanda Cialopi.
All right. So as Marlene had mentioned, that here at the Alaska Native Justice Center, we serve victims of survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and also victims of crime. Our advocacy program is broken into two, where we have two program managers, one that oversees projects and staff that deals with victims of crimes and human trafficking, and then on the other side, which is the programs and projects that I oversee, it deals with domestic violence and sexual assaults. And so that is my primary focus. Those are the survivors and participants that I work closely with, and my staff provide advocacy services and case management services to our victims and survivors of DV and SA. I'm reminded of a quote by a former NFL quarterback, Don McPherson, where he says, "True prevention is not waiting for bad things to happen, it's preventing things from happening in the first place." Well, that is the ultimate goal. I think when we think about prevention, it is definitely not the reality in a lot of our communities and a lot of the underserved communities that we serve. We know in our field that prevention happens in three levels. The first one being stopping violence before it occurs. The second, providing immediate responses to violence. And then the third one is long-term responses to violence. This is where we do a lot of the groundwork. And I know Deb had talked a little bit about wraparound services, and so did Marlene, about the importance of partnership and how that works for us in providing services to our participants. The other things that we're really great at is providing community outreach. Now, I know with COVID that has changed quite a bit from doing in-person outreach to utilizing a lot of our social media platforms and virtual platforms to be able to provide outreach and do a lot of the educational courses that we normally would offer in person. And so we utilize different avenues to continue to provide these services to our participants and to our real communities, so that the work does not stop because COVID is here or because something tragic happened. The work has to continue because this is the only way that we can continue to provide education and prevent domestic violence, which ultimately leads to MMIP situation. So we also provide, as I mentioned, education in terms of presentations. We've done presentations online, we've done them in person, we've done them in schools as well. I think the younger that we can start educating kids about these topics, and as you know, Caroline had mentioned in her presentation prior that there is so much stigma behind these issues, especially among Indigenous people, that our goal is to have an avenue where we can freely talk about these topics and start addressing them at a very young age. I remember I worked for Alaska's only tribal college, and I gave a presentation on sexual harassment and domestic violence. And I had a college student who raised her hand and said, "Wait, I thought that was normal. I thought I've always seen my dad hit my mom, so I always thought that that was normal behavior." As we talked, and you know, as this conversation lead into dating violence, and so these are the conversations that we try to help initiate and start with our young people, so that when they grow up, that we are helping them understand that this is not normal. We are not trying to normalize this by any means, and so we're trying to remove the stigma. We're trying to stop, you know, people from sweeping these under the rug like we've done for so many years, and start that healing process that we need in order to move forward and make progress in these issues that are very vital and important in our communities. The other thing that we do in terms of prevention is we build healthy relationships and healthy habits. We do safety planning with our participants. We do financial management with our participants, going over that, creating financial plans. We also host groups for our participants. One of the groups that I really like is one of our case managers. She does a lot of women empowerment groups, and she invites anyone to participate in her groups. And she talks about different topics and issues to help empower women and young girls, and to get them to start, you know, having healthy conversations about these topics. As Marlene also mentioned, we have a tribal healer that is now part of our programs to help connect folks to their culture. There is a lot of that disconnect when they moved into a huge urban hub community. Like I said, our folks from the village know that Anchorage is the big village. And so that's what we normally call Anchorage, the big village. And so one of the things that we recognize is that when folks move in or transition from the village into the big village, that's when they're most vulnerable to human trafficking, most vulnerable to violence. And so we want to help with that process as they are transitioning. So we provide a lot of education on what to expect. We help folks that transition from the village navigate our justice system. I know that that is something that a lot of our participants have a difficulty navigating, is our justice system. What paperwork do I need? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to connect with? And so part of what we do is we bridge that gap by making those connections, by making those referrals, and we hand them off. And this is what we call our wraparound services, is that with our participants that might need TANF, we walk them downstairs to the second floor and get the application and introduce them to the folks on the second floor, so that they have that connection and they know exactly where to go when they come next time. And so those are some of the efforts that we try to do in terms of prevention to help empower our participants to get their lives back. I know that Marlene had talked a little bit about the services that we provide through Alaska Native Justice Center. I want to say that we are the only advocacy and legal services agency that provides culturally appropriate services because of the population that we serve. And so we do a lot of training with our partners on cultural sensitivity training as well. We do a lot of trauma-informed presentation as well with other partners. And so this way it helps us provide a really holistic approach in the services that we provided throughout Anchorage. And so as Marlene also mentioned, we do also have a legal team who specialize in family law. And so they do a lot of protective order, custody, divorce cases. And so they help our participants navigate the law system and the paperwork and help them understand the court lingo, because sometimes that is hard to understand in itself, right? And so we have a whole legal team that can help explain and break that down so that our participants understand that fully. So I think I will wrap it up there because we're really pushing on time here. But, you know, in general, I want to say that I appreciate everyone that was on this panel, and Carolyn, you have definitely broken down with statistics and really, as you mentioned, there's so many statistics out there. We're definitely presented with statistics every day that just shows how important this issue is and how much the rates continue to increase among Indigenous people. And so this topic is going to be something that's very vital to each and every one of us. So thank you.
And I think the only thing that I'll add to Miss Amanda's great work she's done with her team is that we are survivor-led. And like Deb had said, what did we learn from a few things? We cannot create systems that are set up to fail. So we dove right in and said what works, what doesn't, and got feedback from our survivors and victims. And we feel that that's very important to the success of our programs, not just in advocacy, but I did mention that we serve those in youth and adult reentry as well. And you know, we believe in survivor-led leadership. Most of us here at ANJC have lived experience, which also molds our response to our services that we offer. And in closing, I just want to quickly share a message that I received from the MMIP coordinator here in Anchorage, Ms. Ingrid Cumberledge. We are connected with her, and I wanted to let everybody know a little bit about what Alaska is doing on behalf of those issues. Last year, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced the appointment of Ingrid Cumberledge as the Alaska's MMIP coordinator and launched the MMIP working group to address the complexities of the response in Alaska. The working group was established in September 2020. They meet bi-weekly, and this is tribal-wide. So we're looking at all of Alaska that participates. This working group is a multidisciplinary team involving the collaboration and coordination of tribal representatives, federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement, which is important as what Ms. Carolyn mentioned about different rules that follow when crimes and MMIP happens on those areas. She stated that their work continues with the primary focus on building tribal capacity throughout Alaska in prevention, intervention, resource development, and response to missing and murdered Indigenous persons with tribal teams, collaborative development of MMIP. And that will be in closing for us. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. We appreciate your presentation. In closing, we are opening this up to a Q&A. If there's anybody that has any questions or wants to be called on, please just raise your hand. I don't see anything, but I do have a question. In terms of implementation of culturally relevant trauma-informed work, do you find that there's more individuals that come and seek services when that is implemented versus when it's not implemented?
Well, that question's for Alaska Native Justice Center?
Yes.
Yes. What our approach is the initial screening. We don't have the typical name, address, phone number, what are you here for? We definitely connect, and it's really important. Most of us here at the office are Indigenous, so we do take feedback with each other. on how to address such issues and how do we do screenings that are appropriate for those areas. So Miss Amanda may pitch in here too. You can tell when somebody comes in and applies for an application how the communication style is very different. It might be physical, it might be through the eyes, it might be short and just very curt. And just being able to be trauma informed on how to read those body language movements. And when you're pushing too far and when you have to back off, it definitely takes time. For some of our non-native staff that we have here, part of the conversation is what experience do you have working with the rural areas of Alaska? That is definitely something that we look for in our employment because we have to be able to address several different cultures throughout Alaska. It's not just one culture on a reservation. We are looking at statewide where there's many. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I just want to echo that, as Marlene had mentioned, that we really try to make sure, and one of the things is the language as well, or the facial expressions and whatnot. And so those are kind of very important to read. And so these are why when we hire folks on, like we look at that experience and we look at if you're Indigenous, because you tend to understand more, right, working with Indigenous communities. One of the things that I really like about working for the Alaska Native Justice Center and also, right along, because we're a subsidiary of Cook Inlet Tribal Council, is they consider Pacific Islanders as well as natives. And so we have been able to kind of work, we adapt very well, and we share same values and morals as well. And so that comes in handy when we're working with Indigenous people. And when I hear this question, the first thing I think about is the relevancy, right? So I worked in a tribal college, and oftentimes the tribal college is located way up north. So Utqiagvik is in way top of Alaska. And so we'll get textbooks with a question that says, well, if the train went at 5 miles per hour, how many miles will it take before you get here? Well, we don't have trains up north at all. So our students can't relate to that question because we don't have trains up north. But if you ask the question about, well, if we threw a harpoon at 5 miles per hour and it struck the whale at this and this, that makes sense because that's our subsistence way of life there, right? So that makes sense to us. And so it's making that connection so that it's relevant and so that we get the information that we need in order to better serve our participants, rather than collecting piece by piece and then trying to put that together and make sense out of it.
And the only other thing that I'll add to that is one of the main reasons for us hiring and seeking vital input on healing is starting to bring that back to culture. And that's why we were so interested in building the Tribal Healer program. Very often we refer out to mental health. However, that's the Western way, and that may not be the way that our people heal. So we now have 2 different options for our participants, and they're welcome to utilize both should they need to.
Thank you both. Deborah, a question for you is, at a policy level, is there anything that can be done that is specific for Indigenous communities?
That's a very broad question. I think one lesson that we have learned over the years in projects that are specifically related to collaboration is that the overlap and the misalignment of systems harms families. And wherein collaboration is expected and required and monitored and evaluated, we're more likely to put attention to the way in which we work together as an outcome in and of itself, which has become very evident that that's important to sustain the extra work it takes to work across systems.
Thank you, Deborah. Well, this is the end of our session. In the chat, we have posted an evaluation. I thank our speakers and individuals that came to participate in this session. The work you do is important, and we thank you all for your time. And please take a moment. Oh, do we have a? Okay, so Gina just posted it in there. Please take time to answer the survey, and we thank you all.